Good afternoon, Lonnie.
Good afternoon.
My name is Rob Carpenter, and we're here about the Veterans History Project, and we're going to talk about just have a little conversation about your time before the service and during when you were in the service. And I just want to say thank you very much for your service to begin with. I really appreciate that, and what you're doing is really an amazing thing for future generations to learn from what you're going to share with us today. So, if you'd like to start, can you tell us, give us your name and when and where you were born?
My name is Lonnie Keech. I was born in Grand Haven, Michigan, June 25th, 1957.
Okay. And who are your parents, Lonnie?
My mother was Carol Joy. Maiden name was Green, but my father was Donald Dexter Keech. And no military background for him. In fact, he was shocked to hear that I was even thinking about it.
That you were going to join, huh?
Right.
What'd your parents do for a living? What were their occupations?
My father was a mechanic, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom.
Okay. So she had the hard job.
Yes.
Yeah. And any siblings?
I have three stepbrothers and a deceased stepsister.
Okay. Were any of your siblings in the service?
Yes. Two of the younger ones were. One was in the Army and one was in the Air Force.
Okay. And what were your siblings' names?
My next, I'm the oldest of all of them.
Okay.
So the next one was Donald, and then there was Darwin, and then Wendy, and then David, and then Aaron was the last one.
Okay. And what branches of the service were they in? Sorry.
Army and Air Force.
Army and the Air Force. And because you were the oldest, did they go in after you?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think you going into the service had anything to do with them wanting to join?
No.
No.
We were not living together. I was living with my grandparents at the time, so I didn't have much of an influence on them.
Okay.
Thank God.
So what was your education level before you joined the service?
I was in high school, and then after high school, I decided I was just going to go right into the military.
Right after high school, you
Yep.
did. So there was no college or secondary education there?
Not until after the military.
Okay. Did you join the military by any chance to get benefits to pay for an education? Was that part of the thought process?
Nope. My best friend and I decided that we wanted to see the world through a porthole and decided to go down to the recruiter and sign up on the buddy plan in Muskegon for the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a funny story about that because we knew we wanted to join the military, but we just didn't know what branch. And so we went down to the recruiting station where they had all the different recruiters' offices side by side, and we said, bell bottoms. That's what we want to wear. So we joined for the Cracker Jack uniform.
Okay.
And I guess payback was quite hilarious because after we joined, they did away with the Cracker Jack uniforms. So we never got to wear them until we were discharged, and then they brought them back.
Oh, wow.
So the 4 years that we were in, they did away with the Cracker Jack uniform, but they brought it back.
They did bring it back. Who was your buddy?
His name is David Osborne. We grew up a quarter of a mile from each other, went to school together, did everything together.
Yeah.
We were best friends.
Are you to this day, or?
I haven't seen him in about a year, and I ran into him at a restaurant, and we stood there. Instead of just saying hi, we stood there and talked for probably a half hour.
Oh, wow.
Minutes.
Wow.
Caught up on old times. His family and me, I grew up over there at his house just as much as he was at my house, and it was just like we were all one family.
Wow, that's
So,
neat.
that time apart was different, but because we were never that far from each other. And it was really funny. We went in on a buddy plan. Halfway through boot camp, he said to me, "Dude, this isn't for me." And I said, "Well, you don't have a choice. You signed up. We're both in this for the good." And he said, "No." He says, "I know how to get out." Every day he would run to sick bay. They'd take his blood pressure and say, "Holy smokes, your blood pressure's sky high." Well, he just ran there. And so they discharged him because of high blood pressure. And I was stuck still.
And you were there. Well, good for you for
Yeah.
sticking with it. So you guys signed up on the buddy plan. Can you explain the process from signing up and actually getting to basic training?
Well, what we did was we went into the recruiter's office and we looked over all the different things that the Navy offered. We decided that's what we wanted to try. We did some testing. We wanted to be together through boot camp and training and then advanced training and then whatever, but we weren't going to be doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was funny. He wanted to be aircraft mechanic. I wanted to be a diesel mechanic. But we were going to do pretty much the same kind of training other than the specialized training. Recruiter guaranteed us we would get same duty station through our entire career. So we believed that.
Mm-hmm.
So we joined the Navy, went through our testing and physical, and went to Detroit, stayed the night, got up the next day, raised our right hands, said, "Yep, we'll do it." And then during boot camp, we found out that neither one of us were going to be stationed anywhere near each other. And I think that kind of was what started my buddy's mind of saying, "Hey, if we ain't going, I ain't doing this by myself."
Yeah. Where was boot camp?
Boot camp was Great Lakes, Illinois.
Okay. Can you explain to us a little bit about that experience?
Boot camp was an eye-opening experience for somebody from a small little town of Holton, Michigan. You go down there, and it's the first time I ever rode a train. So I took the Amtrak from Detroit to Chicago, and then I took what I thought looked like a cattle train from downtown Chicago to right in front of the Naval Training Center, Great Lakes, Illinois. So I got off the train and stood in line with a bunch of other guys, and we all had very long hair, because that was the time. We all had long hair, and we're standing there, and this guy come out, and he says, this guy in a uniform started yelling, said, "Anybody seen any men around here? Because all I see is a bunch of girls because of our hair."
Mm-hmm.
So he had that fixed within 24 hours, so he wouldn't have that confused. So yeah, we realized that it was quite an experience, meeting people from all races, colors, creeds, religions. It was something that it just kind of opened my eyes.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the date?
Oh, yeah, the first day I went to Chicago was July 16th, 1975.
1975.
No, that was the first day. And boot camp was quite interesting because you realize that you are nothing when you start, because they tell you that every day. You are nothing. They called you maggots, they called you worms, because you can't get any lower than that. And then when you graduated, you were king of the hill.
Mm-hmm.
And every time that you would go another week in your basic training, you would have that one more week of confidence, but you also seen those guys coming in for the first days, and you would think to yourself, they're nothing. So we always felt good about ourselves, even though we were only there for 3 weeks.
What do you think the purpose of them treating you like that was?
I think it was to break down any walls that you had to, you know. I hate to use the word brainwashing, but I guess it's a form of brainwashing. It's to where they can build you the way they want you.
Okay.
And I think it's a necessary evil. It worked for me.
Mm-hmm.
I was not that kind of guy who was very easily accepted what I was told to do, and I learned that real quick in boot camp, that you will do what they tell you to do, or else you will be doing a whole lot more.
Do you have any examples of the having to do a whole lot more? Or?
Not really, just not for me, but seeing other guys in my group, in my company, they would, get busted doing something that they weren't supposed to do. Their beds weren't made correctly. The Navy is really tough on 45-degree corners on your sheets and your bedding, and your locker has to be stowed just perfect, and you can't have anything out of place. And it didn't seem like it. It seemed like every day somebody was getting popped for
Mm-hmm.
something, and everybody had to do push-ups, which I never felt was fair, but I learned that was a necessity.
Okay.
So, yep, and so it does work, because you started looking out for those that were always screwing up, and you always said, all right, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? You're good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we didn't have to do those push-ups again,
Right.
or running or something, because our 1 mile hike became a 10-mile nature walk.
So those lessons from boot camp, have any of those lessons stuck with you through your life?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's yeah, it has. It's I've used things that I've done, that I did in basic training throughout my life. I mean, being in the military, and then also being a form of the military. I was also a police officer for a while. So, yeah, that, you use those things that you learn as stepping stones to things later on in life.
Sure. That's really interesting. As you went through basic training, can you describe to us kind of like what a normal day would be?
Well, it depends. It depends. Now, on a normal day, it was like up at 5:30. I don't remember exactly what time we were. We were always up way before daylight. Usually, it was screaming and hollering to wake you up. You would jump up. First thing you'd do is stand at attention in front of your bunk. In your skivvies, you're just standing there. And then the company commander would come running up and down, yelling at people, and that would always make sure. That was a great way of waking up in the morning. And then they'd give you 2 minutes to get dressed, and you'd get dressed, and then you'd have to go through PT training and do all of that, and then you'd have to march down to the chow hall, eat your lunch, march back, go through all your classes that you might have to go through in the morning. Then you march back down to the galley again, eat. You'd have like 5 minutes to eat. You'd hurry and eat, march back, do your physical training again, which was never made any sense to do that right after you ate, because somebody was going to get sick.
Yeah.
and then you would do more training, and it was just like it was constant.
Yeah.
There was no breathing.
Okay.
Although there was, I did mention this earlier. The funny thing about, I noticed a picture in my keel, which is a book from boot camp, and there was a big photo of a bunch of guys sitting in this room, and you could barely see them, and it said "Smoke and Coke" underneath.
Yeah.
And this is where you would go get a Coke, and everybody had smoke, and the whole room was so full of smoke you couldn't even hardly see them in the picture, right? And I said, they won't even let you have a cigarette
Yeah.
anymore in the military.
Yeah.
So it's so different
Mhm.
today. So you would get 2 of those a day. Um, and then, yeah, we were in in bed. Lights were out before dark,
Yeah.
and we were up the next day doing it all over again. Sometimes it was 3 o'clock in the morning, depending on if the assistant company commander got drunk the night before. Because he'd come in there, and before he'd go home and go to sleep, he'd come in there and grab the trash can and just start banging it all over the place to wake everybody up, and everybody get up and give him 50, and then he'd pass out. We'd all go back to bed.
Yeah.
I mean, that, as funny as it was a normal thing for him. He was not very well liked.
No, it doesn't sound like it. You mentioned classes during your training. What were some of the classes that you had to take?
But there was a lot of, it was like basic high school classes,
Yeah.
because I understand that not everybody had the same knowledge or ability. I mean, there was a lot of reading and math, and history, and there was a lot of health science stuff. They really wanted us to know about our health science.
Mhm.
They wanted us to be. I mean, as funny as it sounds today, sex education was a big thing for the military, because they wanted to make sure that you were safe.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our other classes that we took, like I took a safe defensive driving class, because you had to do that to get your military driver's license.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that while you were in boot camp.
Okay.
So that was, I mean, you got your workbooks and all of that kind of stuff. Spelling, which I never really had that much problem with spelling, but to see all these people not do well in spelling was just, which hence that's why they needed the spelling classes.
Yeah.
They would give you words, and you'd sit there and write them out. It's just, yeah, quite weird. The classes I enjoyed the most was situational classes, where they would give you a situation and you would have to figure it out.
Okay.
And what they were trying to do is, and I know that was all part of leadership. That was what they were trying to do, is find out who their future leaders were.
Sure. Sure.
So,
do you remember some of the situations they gave you? No. Okay.
I remember enjoying them, but I don't remember
Or what they were. Yeah. So you talked about having 5 minutes to eat. How was the food?
It was like school.
Yeah.
It was like high school food.
Okay.
The cafeteria. It was quickly, largely done. Nothing, didn't have any flavor to it, hardly at all. Because I don't think they knew what salt and pepper was. So they didn't have any flavoring to it. A lot of times for breakfast, it was the same stuff. Eggs that have been sitting there for 2 hours. They just throw scrambled eggs on your plate, in your tray as you went by. Scrambled eggs, a pancake, piece of what they call bacon. I think it was strips of ham.
Mm-hmm.
And then a milk or a juice, and you had 5 minutes to eat it. There was no such thing as finding the syrup or anything like that.
Yeah.
You just ate it. If the syrup was there, you poured it on. If it wasn't there, you didn't look for it, because you didn't have time.
Okay.
but that was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You can just imagine. It's just like a buffet style where you walk by real quick. They You knew better than to ask for extra of anything
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't give extra.
Okay.
So, I mean, you lost a lot of weight. I think I lost a lot of weight before I gained weight back.
Okay. Was there any, like, a most memorable experience that you had in training, in basic training?
um, yeah, I think one of the funniest things is everybody goes through basic training. They know they have the orders of the century that they have to memorize. And all these 21 orders of the century, and I could not remember five for the life of me. I still can't remember, but I knew them all. And you would just pray that when the commanding officer would come by, he wouldn't stop in front of you and ask you, what is the fifth general order of the century? Because you knew, oh my God, please don't ask me. And I must have had it written all over my face because he come walking by me one day and he walked right by me during inspection. Then he turned around and he came right back and stood right in front of me. And I must have had that look on my face, and I just stood there, and he says, any of them he could have picked. Any of them. What's the fifth general order of the century? Because it must be the hardest one to remember.
Okay.
I couldn't remember. I tried it 3 times and couldn't remember. He says, it's 1 week before graduation and you still don't know your general orders of the century. I said, I know them all but that one, sir. He says, that ain't good enough. He says, you're not graduating unless you give me 100 times in your own writing what the fifth general order of the century is. So when do I have time to do that? We're doing all this other stuff. So I'm waiting and waiting, and I'm trying to get them all done. And I got like 75 of them are done at graduation day. Now I'm waiting for him to ask for them because I know he's going to let me graduate. Evidently, he forgot because I kept ducking behind somebody every time he'd look in my direction so it wouldn't remind him.
Yeah.
And it was funny because we graduated. We got our orders. We got on the bus, and as we're leaving, he's standing there with his assistant company commander out front where our bus is starting to leave, and he's waving at everybody and thinking that it's just hilarious. He's just waving like the king or something. And I put my window down on my bus and I said, oh yeah, by the way, the fifth general order of the century is, and he says, you owe me 100. And that was the last time I ever saw him.
So he never got them.
He never got them.
That's pretty good. So you received your orders and you graduated.
Graduated boot camp.
Did any of your family come watch your graduation?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, I should rephrase that. One member of my family came to my graduation. It was my mother and all of my friends from school.
Oh, that's neat.
It was weird. They all loaded up in a couple vehicles and drove down, and I was not expecting it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they came to my graduation. So we all went out to dinner after graduation.
Nice.
Because I was in a company called the Captain's Company, which was out of the 40 companies graduating, the captain will always pick one that impressed him the most as you march by and pass and review. And we did a little something different. We did a little rifle drill as we went in front of the captain, and nobody else knew how to do it. We had been practicing it for like 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so he was so impressed, he gave us the captain's company. And so everybody got 24-hour leave, but we got 72.
So it was worth the extra effort.
It was worth the extra effort. And we went out for 3 days, and yep, I spent time with my family, or
Nice.
my friends, and my mother. Yep. It was quite an experience.
Yeah. So being 1975, how did your friends feel about you being in the service?
They all thought it was great.
Did they?
Yeah. I had one teacher in high school when she found out I was going. She was a young teacher. She found out I was going into the military, and this I had originally signed up while Vietnam was still going.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I actually went in, Vietnam had ended.
Okay.
But when she found out that I had signed up to go in, it was the first time I ever seen anybody emotional. She was crying, saying, "Please don't go, please. You know, this is not what you. This is not for you. I don't want to see you die." And
Mm-hmm.
she was giving me all this gloom and doom about, at during high school graduation about going, and I said, "I've already signed up. I'm leaving in 6 weeks. Bye."
It's done.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I says, I'm as I'm thinking to myself, is there something I should be staying for? I mean, I'm already signed up and ready to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you received your orders, what were your orders?
From boot camp?
From training.
From boot camp, it was to advanced training, CB training in Port Hueneme, California.
So explain to me a little bit about what went on when you got there and how you got there.
Well, I took a week of leave, and I came home, and then I left from here, went back to Chicago, and then flew from Chicago straight to LAX. Once again, small boy, small town. Now you're in LA.
Mm-hmm.
I said, so this is what a palm tree looks like. I've never seen a palm tree before, right? So I see the palm trees. I see all the highways and cars and everything, and I'm just freaking out. I'm going to get lost. There's this guy outside of LAX. Says, where are you going? I said, well, I need to catch a flight to Oxnard, and then I need to go to the Navy base in Port Hueneme. He says, ever been there before? I said, no. He says, it's a short drive, I'll drive you there. Well, I should have thought, wait a minute, why would they be flying me? And he said, yeah, he says, I'll just drive you down there, don't worry. I said, well, how much is that going to cost me? You got to remember, that's 1975. He says, $150. I said, $150? That's what I make in a week.
Yeah.
And then this other guy, I don't know who he was, but he was some guy in uniform, Navy guy. He says, where are you going? And I said, Port Hueneme. He says, so am I. He said, are you on a certain flight? And I said, yeah. He says, don't take that. That guy is going to rip you off. He says, you've already got your flight paid for. Let's just wait a couple hours and fly.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay. So we fly down there. We fly to Oxnard. We get off the plane there and go to the state base in Port Hueneme, and the base says, well, you can't come on base. Your orders don't start here until tomorrow. What do you mean we can't go on base? They said, yeah, you're going to have to go stay at a hotel somewhere, and then come in tomorrow and sign in. Okay. So once again, small boy, small town. I went, stayed the night at a hotel. Had no idea what kind of hotel to get. Well, it was definitely not the right hotel for a young boy. And the restaurant is attached to it only served Mexican food. So that was weird. First time I ever had an order of huevos rancheros. But yeah, that was quite an experience. Then I signed in the next day. They said, your training starts in 2 weeks. We'll see you then. What am I supposed to do for 2 weeks? Well, Do you have a room? No. Okay, we'll go over to the barracks, enlistment men's barracks, check in. Check in with them, they'll give you a room. So I went over there and they had no rooms. I said, how can you not have a room? This is a military base. So they put me up in enlisted men's housing for 2 weeks. So I lived in a house with a bed, a chair, a table, and a refrigerator. It had no couch, no TV, no nothing. I had to go to the barracks to watch TV and then go back to the house to sleep.
Oh, wow.
And I did that. And then I would go to the galley every day, 3 meals a day. That's all I did for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then finally my training started.
Okay. And what were what was your training in?
My training was a diesel mechanic for the Seabees, and which I have never been a diesel mechanic before,
Okay.
but it sounded really cool to work on big trucks, and I had basic knowledge of mechanics.
Sure.
So, and I passed the pre-test with flying colors. So they said, yeah, you'll make a good diesel mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I was told later that anybody that could sign their name would make a good diesel mechanic. So that didn't make me feel any good when I found that out. So I was really impressed with myself when I graduated in the upper 10% of my class, even though,
Nice.
well, there was only 14 of us. So it really doesn't say a lot. You know, if 2 guys would have died, I would have been top of the class. But it was an interesting 5 months
Okay.
of training.
So what were did you learn, what were the types of things you learned about being a diesel mechanic? I mean, was it full blown, or explain that a little bit?
Well, they didn't just start you out as a diesel mechanic. They started you out as an automotive training
Okay.
on how to be an automotive mechanic first. For a couple weeks, they wanted to see what your abilities were,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody went through that with flying colors. Everybody knows how to change their oil, you know,
Yeah.
pull the head covers off and put new gaskets on or whatever. You know, they thought that was really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't, you know, any kid that had old cars that was their only transportation, you knew how to fix those things. You know, there was a lot of stuff that you learned how to do from your dad.
Mm-hmm.
So those things were easy, and then it got into diesel mechanics, and then towards the end of the classes where we were literally tearing a diesel engine completely apart, laying it out on the ground, and then putting it all back together again,
Okay.
and making sure, and it had to start the first time.
Okay.
That was interesting because I was like a fish out of water. But I'll tell you, you know, it's easy adjusting racks and all that kind of stuff for the injectors, but boy, when you take them all apart, and you got to remember what, especially when you get it all back together again, and you end up with a handful of bolts. So, well, look at this; these must not have been needed. So you had to take it all back apart, find out where they were supposed to go.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. It was a lot of I have to say all of that training unfortunately was not used, because everything I did from that point on had nothing to do with diesel mechanics.
Oh, wow. And so that, to the next level then, after training, where were you assigned?
I was assigned, my first duty station after my advanced training was Midway Island. And when I got there, I was attached to the utilities division. which the utilities division is where they take people like plumbers and they put them in the plumbing area. They take care of all the water and all that kind of stuff for the island. The electricians, I mean, it's pretty basic, you know, where they have to go. Well, diesel mechanics went to part of the utilities division. I worked in the power plant that ran the power for Midway Island.
Okay.
My job while I was there was taking readings of the pressures and stuff on the engines while they were running. They were 2,800 horsepower Fairbanks Morse engines, and there were 6 of them, and they were all running at the same time. So you couldn't ever forget your ear protection, even though it made no difference because these engines were loud. And you were in a building with all of these running and no ventilation.
Oh, jeez.
So it was very loud. Your only relief was to literally go outside. And every hour you would go around taking all the readings, the pressure readings, the oil level, fuel levels, all of that kind of stuff. Sometimes we would get lucky and we'd get to change the oil. That would give us something to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because taking readings was boring.
Yeah.
So while I was there doing that, I had decided to do something to keep myself busy. So I had found that there was a contractor, private contractor there on the island. He was an old Japanese man, 71 years old, and his name was Mr. Higa. And I wanted to learn karate. And and this was long before Karate Kid came out. But it was really kind of funny because I saw a lot of similarities with that movie and what I went through.
Oh, okay.
I was his only student, and we did it in the gymnasium on the base. And when I asked him if he would teach me, he laughed at me. He thought I was funny. And the only reason I knew to ask him was because I saw him out doing his katas and exercises, and I said, "That's karate I want to learn." So I asked him, and it took me a couple weeks to talk him into it, but he finally allowed me. This was a 71-year-old man that went everywhere on the island wearing 10-pound weights, one on each ankle.
Wow.
That's how he kept up his strength.
Mm-hmm.
So for a year, I took karate lessons through this guy, and not just karate lessons, history lessons. This guy taught me about the history of karate, and I would go to his room where he was staying on the island, and I mean, it was just like walking into Japan. I mean, his mat on the floor, shoes outside the door. You know, it's just his rice paper doors and everything. It was amazing. The only reason I worked with him for a year, and the only reason that it was only a year, because I was there longer than that, was because his contract had expired.
Oh, okay.
So he left, and one of the last things he said to me before he left was, "If you ever come to Japan, find me, and you will stay with me."
Nice.
Unfortunately, I never got that opportunity.
Never did, yeah.
And back then, in the mid-70s, he was 71.
Yeah.
So I don't think I can look him up right now.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't think he's still around.
Yeah. So how long were you on Midway then?
I was on Midway for 18 months.
For 18 months? And what did you do after Midway?
Well, this is where Midway still has something to do with what I did afterwards.
Okay.
When my karate training was over, I went and decided, because I didn't like just hanging around. I didn't like going to the clubs like everybody did. So I did two things. I joined a band, um, which the Navy had us put together, and it was, today we call it classic rock. Back then it was current. So we did a lot of Eagles and stuff like that kind of music,
Mm-hmm.
um, Freddie Fender music from that era. Um, but that I did that, and I also decided to do a radio show with the Armed Forces Radio and Television
Okay.
Service. Well, that kind of changed my whole career for my last 2 years in the Navy because of the letter of accommodation that I got from the captain of the base. They decided to no longer associate me as a CB, and I was now, from that point until discharge, in the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service.
Okay.
So that's what I did for the rest of the time I was in.
So you mentioned a letter accommodation. Why did you receive that?
Well, I was leaving the island, and the captain used to listen to my radio show every day, and he found out that I was leaving in a couple weeks. So he asked, first thing he asked is, how can I get an extension to his tour of duty here? Well, when he couldn't do that because because there was no necessity to it, he wrote a letter of accommodation for the many hours of service and on the air, which was above and beyond working at the power plant.
Okay.
So, you know how they say rock and roll will kill your ears? Well, so will working in a power plant.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you put them two together, and I still say, huh, all the time. He appreciated the dedication after work, coming to do the radio shows and everything, that he wrote this really nice letter, which is in my packet.
Nice.
And that changed my career.
So how did that? What career path did you take after that?
I mean, I worked Armed Forces Radio and Television until I got out.
Until you got out.
Yeah.
And where were you stationed then after Midway?
After Midway, I went back to Port Hueneme, California. And then after Port Hueneme, California, I went to Long Beach. And I went to Hawaii. And then back from Hawaii back to Port Hueneme for discharge.
Okay. And when were you discharged?
July 19th, 1979. And I'm sure the tire marks are still at the exit gate.
Is there any, in all of your time in the service, what would you say your most memorable story would be?
My most memorable story. Really isn't. I guess it probably when I was on Midway Island. There's a couple things that happened when I was on Midway Island. We were on full alert on the island, and it was really quite hilarious. The island is 5.5 miles long, 2.5 miles wide. The island, completely around the island, had men arm to arm, facing outwards, with fully loaded M16A1s. The reason for that was we had heard that there was a North Korean sub inside our barrier reef. It was at night. I never saw anything. It was at night. They're under the water. I can't see anything. But we were staring out there just in case. And we stood there all night long. And that was probably one of the most scary things, other than, I don't know if you guys ever heard of a thing called the North Korean tree trimming incident, where 3 naval officers were killed trimming trees in the DMZ between South and North Korea. We were put on,
You're good.
but we were woken up, told we were going to be, a certain number of us were going to be sent to Korea because we're going to war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be scary.
And so we all packed our bags and we were ready to go, and then they canceled it.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to go.
Yeah. You remember when that was? No.
I don't remember.
So when you discharged, and you came home, how did that really affect your life? How did your service time affect your life going forward?
I grew up a lot.
Did you?
Yeah. Psychologically, I grew up a lot,
Mm-hmm.
not just physically. Um, there was words in my vocabulary that I had never had before, like yes sir, no ma'am. Respect
Okay.
was, when you're a teenager, sometimes you just don't think of those things. You think you're smarter than everybody else, and then as you get older, you realize I'm not that smart after all. And then as you get old, you realize, maybe I was smarter then. So, yeah, that's it really helped me mature.
Yeah. When you came home, how were you received by the community and your family and friends?
Good. A lot of my friends still, kids that I went to school with, they were very welcoming. Seeing me come home, family and friends, every once in a while I'll have somebody say, "Hey, I still got that picture of you in your uniform," Yeah, well, that was only 4 years of my life.
Yeah. Did the time that you spent in the service, how would you say that has affected your life since then? Like think about, like did you get an education when you came back? Did like a GI Bill or anything? Or,
Yes, I did.
Did you?
I did. I went to college on the GI Bill. In fact, while I was in California when I got out, I went to Ventura College in Ventura, California, and I got a degree in a useless degree in criminal justice,
Okay.
which is, it seems to be the path that I take a lot. I get good education and then I don't follow that education. I was in law enforcement for a while, and then I came back to Michigan, and I took a career change and worked, and I just retired from Mercy Hospital after 31 years.
Mm-hmm. The job you had at Mercy, did it relate back to what you did in the service at all, or was it completely different?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Not at all.
Okay.
I was in patient care at Mercy Hospital, and I did no patient care. Well, I was a patient once when I was in the Navy, but yeah.
No patient care.
No patient care while I was in the military.
So you mentioned a little bit at the beginning of our chat that you went in on the buddy system. Were there any other friends that you made during your time in the service, and do you keep in touch with any of those folks to this day?
I did make friends. Have attempted to locate some of them from Midway Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's very difficult when all you have is a first and last name. You don't have anything else to go on. Yeah, I haven't been in contact with any of them in quite some time.
Okay. Okay. When you got back, have you joined any veterans organizations or anything like that?
I'm kind of stuck. I can't join the VFW because I was never in a war. Um, so I guess I could join the American Legion. I was asked to,
Mm-hmm.
but even though I'm retired, I got no time.
Yeah.
I've got 12 grandchildren, and that all happened in the last 5 years.
Oh, wow.
All six of my kids decided to all have kids at the same time.
So that keeps you busy.
So yeah, so now we have 12 grandchildren. I have a daughter and her husband that own a farm that I go volunteer a day a week. We'll work for food, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
They have a huge farm out in Fremont. So I do that. I put one of my grandsons, on the bus every morning. Um, so yeah, I'm pretty busy
Busy guy, yeah.
with everything. So trying to find time to be involved in one more organization, and I don't want to do it and then not be involved.
Sure.
You know, if I'm going to do it, I want to be involved.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if I'm too busy, then that's not fair.
Yeah. I get that. I know we've talked about a lot of stuff today. If there's anything you'd like to add that we haven't talked about, or anything else you'd like to discuss.
I would like to add one thing.
Absolutely.
I wanted to share this. Okay, this is a picture of my son and I. This is me when I was in boot camp, and this is my son when he was commissioned, and he had this picture specially made so we could be next to each other. So
That's awesome.
He is now a lieutenant commander, Naval Intelligence, Hawaii.
That's awesome.
Yep.
You think he joined the Navy because of his dad?
Yeah, he always said he was going to join the Navy, but he was going to be a fighter pilot.
Okay.
But he didn't pass the physical. Everybody says, "Oh, bad eyes." I said, "No, eyes are perfect. Everything's perfect. The problem is he's 6'3".
Okay.
Can't fit in the cockpit
Won't fit.
of a fighter jet when you're 6'3".
Yeah, that's too bad.
So he did the next best thing. He became Naval Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
So now he gets to have those pilots fly him everywhere.
There you go.
He's been to and from Washington, D.C. numerous times. He was in the Persian Gulf when the Twin Towers were dropped.
Wow.
So his ship, which was the Carl Vinson, was very popular because they were the first aircraft to attack in the Persian Gulf. And then the Carl Vinson was the ship that they brought Osama bin Laden back on. Well, halfway back. So he's been involved in a lot of things.
That sounds like it, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you think about who's going to watch this video, maybe tomorrow or years from now, what would you like to say to future generations about your experiences?
My experiences at the time, I questioned why, but as you get older, you look back and you say, thank God I did. It taught me respect, and it taught me a purpose. There's a purpose. We all have a purpose, and that was my purpose. It was to do my service, and I think that would be a good plan for everyone. I wished it was not just a necessity. I wished it was mandatory, because it's very, very rewarding.
Awesome. Lonnie, I want to thank you today for your time. I really appreciate it. what you've done. Not only your service was amazing for our country, but spending the time today so that future generations can learn about what you did and what happened back in the day. So thank you very much, and
Thank you.
you have a great day.
You too.
Appreciate it.